Yeah, I mean, everyone's talking about like Chat GPT because like pretty much all these tools are built on top of open AI, right? And so like I think really when it comes to AI companies right now, a lot of it's around distribution. So like obviously it's an easy win for like Notion or ClickUp or any of these other larger organizations to just roll out an AI kind of tool set for their existing customers. That's a no-brainer value add for them. And then when it comes to like standalone type of AI companies, I mean Jasper, just their timing was incredible. The B2B copywriting tool, and they scaled like crazy. And I know Dave, and amazing to see what they've accomplished. But I think if you were going to start like a Jasper today and scale that fast, it'd be like near impossible because like that market in particular of like copywriting has gotten hyper competitive.
Well, thanks for jumping on, man. I think we can like start to ease our way in.
Yeah, it sounds awesome. I appreciate you guys having me, and excited to dive in.
Yeah, let's talk about some of the different, maybe like the past year or so, and some of the changing conflicts with global supply chains and how things like changed completely from COVID when the cost of a container was through the roof and there was a lot of constraints on the supply chain side to where they are now, which is categorically different. And then I think later on in the podcast we can dive into China-US trade war and how that is creating an interesting dynamic for people who've sourced products from China or from the East for the past few decades. So there's a lot in there. Maybe we can just start with where are we at today with global supply chain, Sourcify, and your role in some of that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, global supply chain has really been a roller coaster the past 4 or 5 years. Even before that. I mean, even before COVID, we had the whole China tariff debacle and tariff costs rising, and people misunderstanding who's actually paying for those tariffs. Then we had, like you said, freight costs going through the roof, and what does that mean for SMBs that are importing product where all of a sudden your freight costs just 5x or 10x in some cases. It's insane. And now I think you have this dynamic where freight costs have gone down, but there's just the whole side of random lockdowns that still happen, and then also just what's going on with e-commerce as a whole in terms of a lot of these companies use debt to fuel growth, especially when purchasing inventory, and now a lot of them are in a cash crunch in terms of paying for inventory that they might have already sold or sitting on too much inventory, right? And so I think it's been a really tough situation for e-commerce brands to understand how to forecast. And e-commerce grew like crazy the past 3 years. It's still growing, but it's not growing at the pace that it was during COVID, of course. And I think when times are good, people think the good times are going to last forever. And if anything, everyone's learned during the past 3 years to really be diligent when it comes to your spending and your inventory, and understand when there's a slowdown, you need to be well positioned because otherwise that could really at worst put you out of business.
So there's a lot in there. Basically, some of that is inventory financing and the best way to approach that. And then there's also just the question of where do you source and what are the most advantageous regions. Maybe let's start there. Like if you're a founder thinking about your supply chain and the places where you're manufacturing products, where are the like tried and true locations that you should be going?
I mean, number one, China for sure, right? I think China is still the world manufacturing hub. They have, the most agile supply chain. You can produce products, especially if you're just starting out in smaller quantities, whereas a lot of places, other places you can't. Especially I remember when I first went to Vietnam, like 2017 maybe or so, and a lot of the factories there were better suited to work with major Fortune 1000 brands, and weren't really in a position to work with small, medium-sized e-commerce brands. And I think that's changed a bit. But at the end of the day, like if you're just trying to launch an e-commerce brand, number one, the best access to factories in terms of your ability to find the right factory is going to be China. And then in terms of your ability to actually find a factory that fits your needs and fits kind of the MOQs that you want to start with, it's going to be China 100%. There's different reasons to go outside of China, whether it be because you want something that stems from Italian leather, or because you want, a special type of manufacturing process. But at the end of the day, like most e-commerce brands are still in large part produced in China.
So that do you consult any brands to diversify the regions in which they're gathering resources, like for any for any reason, just like for mitigating risk, or is that really not an issue?
Yeah, I mean, Sourcify has 4 offices in Asia. So China, Vietnam, India, and Pakistan is what we cover. And, when it comes to diversification, we really think about net cost in terms of your net landed cost. I think a lot of times like unit cost might be more attractive in China, but then if you look at tariffs, especially like during the time when there was a lot of tariff hikes, that made it so it was more advantageous to produce in India or in Pakistan. So diversification is always important. I don't think anyone should ever be single sourced. You always should have backup suppliers to work with, but at the end of the day, I mean, I think diversification across country right now, I think a lot of that stems from geopolitical risks, which is something we probably spend the whole day talking about if we wanted to. But there's so much going on right now between China and America, and I think especially during COVID, we saw that the world's kind of health supply, both from medicine and both from PPE material, stems out of China, and it was just kind of insane from my perspective to see how much of the American consumer relies on China when it comes to everything from their medicine to supplements to PPE type of equipment. And so I think diversification is going to be top of mind, and especially from a geopolitical standpoint, you see the U.S. creating the CHIPS Act and a lot of the other government funded resources to enable companies to actually set up real manufacturing facilities here in the States and incentivizing large companies to do that.
Yeah, I think we definitely want to get into, I think from our perspective, what we see as like the decoupling of, both of the Chinese and American systems, because they became so entrenched over the past 30, 40 years from a consumption perspective, which was largely the US market and the US consumer being fueled by products that were made in China by and large. Before we get there, though, just to talk a little bit more about the dynamics of manufacturing and some of the different regions that you might want to look to if you're thinking about diversification, which I think a lot of US companies are, because they are seeing some of this tit for tat trade war, technological wars, geopolitical wars, et cetera, coming up between the US and China. That could be a whole podcast in and of itself. But what is it about the Chinese manufacturing hub that makes it so competitive? I'm particularly curious, I'm assuming wages have increased over the last 30 years in China as they've kind of commercialized and, leveled up. But is it just their skill set is just much better in terms of manufacturing and being nimble? Is the technology better? Walk us through that a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think it really stems from both, the actual average wage in China and then also the source of materials, right? Like a lot of people don't realize when you produce any consumer product, you've got to look at where the raw materials are stemming from. And the vast majority of products have raw materials that can stem from China. And so it's kind of like the mecca of raw materials for any product you can think of, whether it be watches or, furniture or, you name it. I mean, really any consumer product. There's raw materials that a factory could utilize in China. Whereas if you go to Mexico, even Mexico, a lot of suppliers are getting the raw materials from China or from other places in the world. And so they just don't have the access to raw materials. I think that's first and foremost. And then secondly, kind of like what you hinted at in terms of the cost of labor there, which is, very affordable from a manufacturing standpoint. And also the diligence, I think, of the way that factories are run and managed. I mean, a lot of times, I've been to factories in China that are actually better managed than factories in America, and vice versa, right? I don't think there's like a one size fits all type of outlook that people should have. I mean, definitely there's some factories in China that are really poorly run and have horrible quality, but the same could be said as some factories in America too, right? So I think at the end of the day, it really depends on the supplier you're working with and how you can diligent them to produce, the product that you want to produce. But yeah, I mean, from a geopolitical standpoint, it definitely stems from raw materials and cost of labor.
So basically, they've got a lot of raw materials. So if you're producing or if you're trying to produce in other areas, they're usually going to get those raw materials from China. There's efficiently run factories with cheap cost of labor. And, ostensibly from what I've heard, they have great technological advancements in those factories. I mean, especially if you look at sneakers, which, I have some experience in, you look at Italian factories, they can't even compete with some of the tooling that the Chinese factories have, which is really interesting when you think about
Right.
luxury sneakers and how they're, for years have been made in Italy.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of sneakers, the biggest factory I've been to was actually in Vietnam, and they produced for like Clark's and Adidas and a lot of just like the major shoe brands. And they literally had like 20,000 people in their It was like a mini like town that they had, and they had like a whole. I mean, it was literally a town that was a factory. It was just you had to see it for your own eyes. It was crazy.
So for some of the large American manufacturers who are thinking about diversification, we've seen Apple look at Indian factories, and I'm assuming a lot of that economic spillover will enrich some of these other, Southeast Asian locales like Vietnam or Cambodia or others. What do you think the lag time is there just with those countries being able to compete with like a China? And I mean, more specifically, I'm interested in, e-commerce founders or direct to consumer founders, retail consumer founders in the US trying to think about like how resilient is my supply chain and where should I be thinking about diversification?
Yeah, I mean, like Apple, look, Apple doesn't produce the products themselves, right? They contract with Foxconn, and so it's more of a question of Foxconn and how agile can they be in terms of producing products for Apple. I think there's, large incentives for China, obviously, to keep Apple producing products in China, and I think they, will keep some of their supply chain there. But, Foxconn at their level definitely is thinking about and wants to diversify. But, for them, I mean, a few cents just means so much in terms of the cost of an item because the volume that they're producing at, right? And so I think with Foxconn, they have facilities across Asia already. It's just a matter of are there the raw material sources there? Do we have the right labor there? And what are kind of the geopolitical climates in those countries that we're potentially moving Apple's supply chain to? I think most medium-sized brands like sub 100 mil don't necessarily need to really think too closely about that. I mean, unless you've just got an incredible supplier outside of China, most of the time you're going to be in China. But there are some amazing suppliers outside of China too, right? And diversification is definitely important. But I'm going to say, it's a lot harder to diversify remotely. And I think a lot of companies, really need to work with like a Sourcify or have their own sourcing team in, Vietnam or Pakistan or India or wherever it may be, because I think the quality issues that come up outside of China can be a lot more drastic than within. And that's partially because Chinese factories have just been so used to dealing with, American brands for so long. So they understand, kind of the quality that we expect and the relationship that we expect. Whereas, if you're going to a supplier in India that, hasn't exported to America or exports a small amount to America, what you realize is that the quality standards in Europe and in Africa and in North America are vastly different. And so you've got to really understand, well, where has this country mostly been, exporting to, and obviously where has this factory, mostly been exporting to.
So, and tell us about the consulting work that you do with brands. Is that mostly in that, sub $100 million revenue range, or is it beyond that? And I know you recently, exited Sourcify. So
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, so with Sourcify, we have a project management software for supply chain teams where they can have transparency in their supply chain to actually understand like what's going on with each production run, which is pretty cool. And then we have a sourcing team in those, 4 countries: China, Vietnam, India, and Pakistan. So we go to factories, we audit them, we handle production management, we perform quality control inspections, and oftentimes we handle freight forwarding as well. And so, I mean, at the end of the day, for us, most of our customers are doing 5 to 100 million revenue, and our goal with every customer is how do we, improve their unit margin on their product. So we look at, unit costs, and we look at freight and try to understand how we get the, product landed to their warehouse or 3PL in the most efficient and cost-effective manner, while, improving lead times and improving quality.
So is most of the discovery process for brands either trying to diversify or trying to find the right manufacturer for a product still, like for a while there was like super murky, like lots of information asymmetry, hard to find the right factory, referral basis. Has that changed at all? Or is that just kind of the general way it's been and will be?
I think like on one hand, like for example, Alibaba has done a good job of bringing factories online in China, right? Like before Alibaba, it was so hard to find a supplier in China. and it's a great kind of open marketplace, great starting point for people to try to find their first factory. But what a lot of people don't realize is on Alibaba, it's just pay to play. Like the factory that shows up for your search result for shoes is just paying Alibaba the most advertising dollars to rank for that keyword. And so I think that's a big misconception around Alibaba, is that like the best rated factory is not, the highest search result. And also a lot of factories, aren't on Alibaba. But outside of China, it's really hard to find a factory unless you have a local team or a local, sourcing agent like Sourcify. And so I think, when it comes to brands producing outside of China, it's really hard for them to find a factory because there's not really like an Alibaba of like India per se.
Let's move to more of the future and kind of like what you see as, these geopolitical challenges creating certain difficulties for end like business owners. Some of our clients on the agency side, they couldn't get as price competitive on some of their lower end products because of tariffs, for instance. In commoditized verticals like, packaging or rugs or whatever it might be. But what do you really see as challenges, in the coming future for American businesses and American owners? Obviously, like, I think both sides of the aisle in the American political spectrum are pretty hawkish on China. I think that's one of the things that a lot of people agree on, for better or for worse. But that's obviously going to create difficulties for business owners because our economies are so intertwined and they're trying to decouple. But is that even possible for American consumers and for American businesses who are sourcing by and large a lot of their product from China, like you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, I think the hardest thing facing American businesses right now is debt. Like so many businesses took on debt to grow and fund inventory, and right now that debt is eating them alive. I mean, I personally know 3 e-commerce brands that have filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy because their growth slowed and their debt payments, didn't decrease, and debt ate them alive. And so I think managing debt right now is extremely challenging for a lot of businesses, especially from a cash flow standpoint. And so, that's something that comes to mind right off the bat. I think too, like a lot of these kind of revenue-based financing solutions like Shopify Capital or Clearbank or, whatever it may be, they're honestly pretty predatory in terms of their terms.
They're
They make it
expensive.
so
Yeah.
easy. They make it so easy to get a loan because you click a few buttons and they have all your data and they say, okay, your business now can get, $250,000. Great. But what a lot of business owners don't realize is the APY and the interest that they're paying on that money. And it's just insane. I mean, you're talking about like 25, 30+% interest rates, which is just out of this world. And it makes it like they make it seem so kind of cheap and easy because it is. That's kind of their goal. Cheap and easy to get those loans, but those loans are just so aggressive. And so I think a lot of businesses right now mismanage their cash, and they're in a really tricky situation with their debt. And a lot of them too, like from a supply chain standpoint, they didn't have payment terms with their factories, right? And if you can, really optimize your cash conversion cycle, then you're going to be in a great position as a business. And cash conversion cycle basically means, am I selling this product before I actually have to pay for it, pay the supplier for it? And so the best brands in the world, like Gymshark, they were able to grow because they had such good payment terms with their factory where they could actually sell their product before they had to pay for the product. I think that's such a key in today's world of e-commerce. But yeah, debt is a challenging beast to deal with for any business.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with you. And it's really interesting, like having a good CFO or just someone who's really attuned to cash flow management and inventory management. That's like an art and a science in and of itself, especially when you're managing multiple distribution channels from wholesale to direct. I think a lot of the thought leadership, at least in this time right now, post COVID, has been around getting smarter in terms of cash conversion cycle and financing. And there are better solutions coming to the table. Like, I completely agree with you on Clearco and Shopify Pay. And frankly, I think those solutions are going to have a lot of trouble because the brands that are going after them are credit seeking in many instances, and they're not going to be able to pay back on some of this capital and some of these loans.
I mean, the default rates are going to go up. And I mean, what sucks even more, though, is a lot of those loans have a personal guarantee. So those founders are holding the bag. And that's brutal as a founder too.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a bit of a debt crisis on both sides. I mean, on the founder side, and then also on the consumer side. I just was looking at a stat the other day that, you know, a third of American consumers have like precipitously high debt, and it's the highest consumer debt rate ever of all time. So we're seeing that, like, you know, the American consumer is more content taking on debt to fund lifestyle rather than being judicious with how they're spending. And I think this is fueled by like our economy too, and, you know, the way that we advertise and push products out. And it's also just in, you know, sometimes human
And
nature.
people just aren't taught about debt, right? Like debt can be used as a tool to build wealth, like 100%. I mean, that's how real estate really operates. Without debt, you know, the real estate market would be dead. And so I just think people aren't educated about debt, right? Like, you know, if debt's not helping you build asset and build ownership in an asset, like it's probably not going to be a good debt to take on. Like all this consumer financing, Klarna, you know, Afterpay type of product. Like
It's a
if someone
bad
is,
type of debt.
oh, I mean, if someone has to take on debt to buy like, you know, a handbag or shoes or whatever they want, like that's absurd. You shouldn't be buying that in the first place. And, you know, debt just has such a big misconception. And I think a lot of people are like, no one teaches debt, right? And, you know, debt should be used as a means to grow your asset value or you know, make a real estate purchase. And I think that's a great way to utilize debt. And that's why, you know, real estate revolves around debt. But in terms of, you know, buying a luxury item, you know, debt it is not really a good solution.
I mean, this is exactly how like central banks stimulate the economy too. Like, you know, it's debt financed, but I think said differently, it's like if you're using debt to finance the purchase of assets that are performing, meaning they generate cash flows in excess of whatever the interest rate was on that debt that you borrowed, that is by and large productive for society and productive for yourself. But if you're using debt to finance consumer luxury purchases, that's a negative to society as a whole. So I think it's a really interesting take. I think people don't explore enough into finance or debt, or like, you know, these concepts of credit and debt, because it's made out to be more confusing than it actually is. And, you know, there are a number of really good resources that I think, you know, I'm hoping with, you know, influencers and like people who are like actually just creating their brands around educating this stuff, it'll get out there to more and more people. Going back to the just kind of like what's in front of us. So I think the debt issue is big for founders and for consumers. You think that's more of an issue than supply chain or actually getting inventory? Is there anything else that you're seeing that's interesting?
I mean, like, I think right now cash flow is just such a challenge for e-commerce brands. Like, you know, in terms of supply chain, like I can guarantee anyone listening that runs a brand that's doing 5 to 100 mil, like they're going to save money using Sourcify. That's for sure. I mean, that's literally, you know, how we grew and how we have had success with our customers. So I think like from a supply chain front, there's so many things that business could do to save money. But, you know, really the challenge right now is around cash flow because forecasting was just completely off for these brands the past few years. And so, you know, I think a lot of them kind of bought inventory like they thought they were going to grow like they were growing in 21 or 22. And, you know, that's just not the same this year. And so a lot of them are over inventoried or, you know, still
They just
paying
want to
for
get it
it.
off their books
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know, one of
at
my friends
discounts too.
in Salt Lake runs a liquidation company for consumer products. And he's like, blown away by the amount of brands that are coming to him trying to liquidate inventory because they just, you know, need to get it off their books. I mean, it's a pretty crazy situation for the liquidation market, but a lot of times too, like there's not as many buyers for these liquidated goods as there used to be.
And to go back more to the US China trade issue, I know you've done a bunch of speaking on this too. Would love to get your take on where you see that heading.
You know, I think the upcoming like election's gonna have a big determination on where that heads. And, you know, I try not to get too political, but at the end of the day, I mean, you know, China is a world superpower, right? And I think there was a big shift just in their currency in terms of now, you know, they're trading oil with Brazil and Russia in the Chinese renminbi, right, instead of the dollar. And so I think that's a huge shift. I think that, you know, has even more outlandish impact for the US dollar and the value that our dollar has globally. And so, the world's shifting, right? Like, I love Ray Dalio's book, The Changing of World Order. And, he's got some really good points in there in regards to, what stage are we at in America and what stage is the world at in America. I think from a culture standpoint, America is still far ahead and really a thought leader in regards to a lot of our kind of culture icons. I think from, our politics and a lot of our laws, especially lately, we've kind of fallen behind times and maybe interpreted some of our laws too literally in some sense. So, I think there's so many ways to look at the future, but I think for business, look, America is still in such a strong position. American consumers are still buying products, whether they should be or shouldn't be. But the economy seems to be, working well, and unemployment is still super low, right? Even though there's been all these layoffs right now, and I don't know when this episode is going to come out, but even with all these layoffs, with Meta and all these big tech companies, I mean, the unemployment rate is still just extremely low. So there's so much opportunity there as a business.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's actually funny. I was just telling Jackson to read that Dalio book. I love Ray Dalio. And I think
I thought you paid him to mention that book, to be honest.
Yeah, Nathan and I were texting before this. No, I think he has some good takes that are important for everyone listening to potentially read. Yeah, I mean, for us in our business, I think it's more just like the cost of labor here. Like, yes, unemployment is relatively low. Is that going to stay? TBD on this upcoming election. But I think what's kind of reverberating through the economy, and I think what a lot of founders I'm seeing are taking advantage of more and more is, global talent and just offshoring, and how that's contributing to a greater portion of just US companies in general. Just like now that, post COVID, brands went remote, we're highly digital. There's just like a lot of output and task work that's needed. I'm finding a lot of our clients, like our business is 50% global now.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think that stigma of like outsourcing, offshoring is definitely decreasing. And I'm curious to hear what your take is on just offshoring.
Yeah, I mean, I believe in a global workforce 100%. I mean, I think if your business isn't global, you're probably overspending on talent, right? I mean, you can get such good engineers, such good support and sales team members overseas, designers. I mean, you name it, honestly. And so, yeah, I mean, we work with team members like at Bubble Hotels. Our support's in the Philippines. We've even used an architect in Eastern Europe before. Um, we've utilized global talent, really at every business that I've, owned or operated. And I think you have to be using, a team around the world to just, make the most of outcomes and also your money, because, hiring talent domestically, I think is great to an extent. But at the end of the day, when someone in the Philippines or someone in Eastern Europe can, have the same output or even better output for, a fifth or a tenth the cost, it's like, well, what is my incentive to hire locally then, right? And so, especially with remote work, I think that was a huge catalyst to, the global workforce.
It begs the question of like what skills are valuable to US companies and would incentivize US companies to continue to hire talent locally. Like that's honestly the things that are going through my head and how I counsel, people who are fresh out of college. It's like develop a valuable skill set that can't be replaced by offshore talent or can't be replaced by AI plus offshore talent or whatever it might be.
What do you think is that though?
I'm
Like,
interested.
What couldn't be replaced by offshore talent or AI? Like I haven't come across anything yet.
I mean, it's an interesting question. I think it has something to do with obviously experience always helps the equation. So that's a tough answer to tell someone who's right out of college because they literally have no experience by definition. I think it's a combination of hard skills, communication, and like the things that computers or machines can't really replace, which is like creativity, EQ, general problem solving ability, like from a conceptual perspective, being able to think critically. And those are some skill sets that are taught in college. So I think that's valuable, but you need to be able to pair that with some experience. But I don't think there's one right answer. But I think it's interesting, Nathan, because you're now getting into the AI space. Talk to us about your new startup and your new company.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't really even like announced it publicly, but at Sourcify we had a support team in the Philippines, and like when GTP3 came out, we launched we had like a plugin that just used AI to answer support tickets based on previous answers to tickets, and it worked well. Our support team loved it, made them a lot more efficient. And when I sold Sourcify, I was like, this is a really good idea and cool product that makes the lives of a support team a lot easier and makes them work a lot more efficiently. So it's like a win-win. And, my goal isn't to really replace support teams. I think a lot of people think like AI is going to become like a bot in support. And really my goal with it is to empower them, to make them more efficient, to be able to handle, more tickets and have faster resolution times. And so that's been what I've been building. It's called Caffeinated CX, and it's early stage, but it's been fun, and I think like it's got some legs, so it's an exciting time.
So that's big praise coming from you though, because I mean, I know when you were at Sourcify, you were like launching. I remember we had that conversation. You were trying to, at one point, you were launching like, what was it, like a product every 2 weeks or something, and you were trying to test whether they were effective through Facebook ads. So you had a lot of reps basically, and I'm assuming that was more on the consumer side.
Mm-hmm.
When did you like? What about this business? Were you like, oh, this thing has like early signs of product market fit? It's working. Like,
Yeah, I mean, I
how
think
are
I
you?
had like a unique insight having, used like built a similar tool for our team at Sourcify. And I think really what this was is like, we have people like hitting us up like all the time to get access to it. And right now we're in like pretty much like a closed beta for the most part. And so I think it's just providing value as quick as possible. Like, can you get to that aha moment as soon as possible with your customers? And so that's really what we focused on, and we've been able to make that happen. And it's been pretty amazing to see like support teams be like, wow, this is amazing and really useful. And so I think really like time to value is super important. I think too, like right now I'm like pretty against like sales motions, like if someone can't start using the product like today, I don't think that business is going to be around like in 5 or 10 years. Like I just think so many software companies go through this like crazy B2B sales cycle or sales motion, and your time to value for a customer needs to be immediate, because the attention span of everyone is so low that like if I'm going to compete with, let's say like for example, my friend started ClickUp, and they had a great product led growth motion, and that's how you get someone in the door and get someone using, and then you upsell them and sell them more on an account level. But to get someone to just start using your product right away is just such a amazing win. And so I think that's really where I started to get excitement. It's just people were using it and, showing and telling us like, yeah, this is awesome, but can you add this and that and, edit this feature? And, that's kind of the cycle that we're going through right now. But I think especially at an early stage, if you can be iterative as fast as possible and just have like a quick feedback loop, you're going to have a huge just going to be able to have product market fit a lot faster.
So I think I agree with you, just like time to value and just kind of getting customers in the door. And if you have a product that like is providing value, it's going to, expand with the business. How do you think about that from a pricing perspective? Like, is it freemium? Like, are you just getting people on board and saying, hey,
Yeah,
try
I
this out
mean,
for a month?
pricing can be hard. I mean, like right now, with Caffeinated, it's just usage based, so it just depends on the amount of times they use our AI, which people love because our competitors are all like fixed price per seat, charging per user, and like they've really taken a like B2B sales motion, and some of them have had success with that, which is great. But like I think just making your pricing align with the outcome of your product is kind of the right way to think about it. I think freemium is awesome too if you can kind of gauge some of your features that are vital. Like one of the things that I know we're going to do at Caffeinated is like basically make it free to have basic AI. But then if you want to actually train your AI based on like your past tickets and your knowledge center and just make your AI like a lot more accurate, that's when, they have to pay. So I think gating features is a really good way to go about freemium. And yeah, I mean, I think pricing is so hard, but it's just a matter of trial and error, right? Like how do you figure out what's going to get people to sign up and stick with you?
Nathan, can you unpack a little bit about what the product actually does? Like if I'm on a CX team, how I interface with it, how it provides outcomes to me beyond just like,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, for sure.
response
So
to
we sit
tickets.
on top of like every support desk, whether it be like Zendesk or Freshdesk or Help Scout, whatever it may be. And we're basically like an app in each one of those marketplaces. And so when a rep opens a ticket, our AI pre-fills the response based on how they've previously responded to a ticket. You can see like NPS scores, satisfaction scores, urgency, and you can summarize tickets if it's a long ticket. You can, automatically take notes from voice calls. Like we just have basically um, like superpowers for customer service teams, which is pretty cool. And so we're really superpowering support reps, and yeah, it's been pretty fun so far.
Do you recommend, if you're being totally honest, do you recommend the product for teams that are like, maybe 4 or 5 people, the founder's still responding to tickets? Like, is it super valuable at that point? Or is it more powerful once you have a larger team that, you can really start to put
Um,
this jetpack behind?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like kind of, I guess a good and bad of our business right now is we don't really have like a niche that a lot of our customers are from. Like it's across the board. I mean, we have one company that's 330 something people. We have another company that's 6 people, right? So it's all across the board in terms of size of business and in terms of industry, which like I wish I could say like all of our customers are, e-commerce or SaaS or fintech or whatever it may be. But like our customers are literally like in every vertical you can think of, which is good and bad. I mean, for us, it's a little tricky because like the next iteration of our product is actually using AI to perform the support functions. So let's say you need to like cancel an order or refund an order or whatever it may be. And in order to do that, we have to plug into obviously where those orders are stored. So like Shopify and Magento and Stripe and wherever those companies store their customer orders.
Talk to us about the competitive landscape. It's surprising to me that like, a Gorgeous or even like a large stage BPO like a Telus or a TaskUs hasn't, which is actually where our COO used to work. They haven't like, they're not on this already. Talk to us about the competitive landscape.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked to some BPOs about like working with their team and whatnot. And I mean, the industry is like getting more and more competitive, right? I think competition is good. Like, I think a lot of people are like kind of scared of competition. I think it's good because it makes you innovate faster, it makes you provide more value. It really makes you like optimize your product. And so I love competition. I mean, even at like Sourcify, I became very close friends with like every other like tech driven sourcing platform that there was. And especially when we sold to a strategic called ISBA, which is like a supply chain consultancy. And I don't think if I had been friends with our competitors, would that deal have happened. And so I think I always try to be friendly with competition because the market's huge, right? There can be multiple winners.
What do you mean by that exactly? Just to go deeper, like, were your did you get an introduction to ISBA from, like, one of your
Yeah, I was
competitor
from like
friends, or?
a mutual friend in the industry, but I mean, like we talked to like every competitor, and some of our competitors that had raised more money than us, that actually weren't as big as us, like thought about acquiring us and went through due diligence and whatnot, but just wasn't a fit, and so I think competition, like you can be as friendly as you want. I mean, I've had dinner with all my kind of competitors. I've had drinks, and the market's huge, right? It's like saying that you would never meet with or talk to another agency, right? It's like there's going to be agencies and companies that are better suited for certain customers and vice versa. So, man, we even did some referrals with some competitors sometimes.
Yeah, we definitely have the same approach. There's thousands of agencies, and the ecom community is pretty tight knit. So we definitely stay close to some of our competition.
The way
Um,
I look at AI, I wanna ask you a little bit more about the AI landscape because I'm sure you're thinking about it all the time. And the way that I see it right now is companies that are actually using AI tools, whether it be yours, whether it be, ChatGPT or some of these other more niche ones, they're making incremental optimizations to their ops. And I'm sure from your perspective, you'd say, we're making CX teams 2x or 3x as good. But to me, it's kind of like incremental optimizations, where I see like in the next few innovation cycles of AI, it's going to start to get really serious, where companies who are willing to actually adopt this into their ops are going to be able to, make huge gaps in competitive advantage. But I'm curious, like, do you see any other AI tools as like really breaking out from the crowd? Because you see these charts where it's like the AI landscape in this vertical, you've got these 10, in this vertical, you got 20, in this, and everyone's talking about ChatGPT at the end of the day. So I'm just curious, like, what other tools other than yours are you really interested in, and how do you see the space helping businesses?
Yeah, I mean, everyone's talking about like Chat and GPT because like pretty much all these tools are built on top of open AI, right? And so like, I guess let's be clear, when we talk about AI companies, like 90, I don't know, probably 99%, 95% of them are built on top of open AI. And so no one actually has their own, AI team. It's more so like full stack engineers or front back end engineers that can, fine tune and better prompt these models within OpenAI. So like we're on GPT-4, that was released probably, I don't know, a month ago or so. And, the industry is moving so quickly. I think really when it comes to AI companies right now, a lot of it's around distribution. So like obviously it's an easy win for like Notion or, ClickUp or any of these other like larger organizations to just roll out an AI kind of tool set for their existing customers. That's a no-brainer value add for them. And then when it comes to like standalone type of AI companies, I mean, Jasper, just their timing was incredible. The B2B copywriting tool, and they scaled like crazy. And I know Dave and JP and their whole team there, and it's just amazing to see what they've accomplished. But I think if you were going to start like a Jasper today and scale that fast, it'd be like near impossible because like that market in particular of like copywriting has gotten hyper competitive. So we'll see. I mean, I think there's a lot of opportunity to be had. I don't know like what the kind of venture scalable businesses are going to be yet. Like, Jasper raised a big round. They're probably like the best capitalized writing tool out there right now. But we'll see. I mean, but at the end of the day, all of them are built on like OpenAI or similar models to that.
Totally. Is it on your roadmap at all to work on a derivation of, a GPT model and kind of create your own that's bespoke to CX? Or, I'm sort of a layman coming in asking that, but like just curious if that's on the roadmap at all.
No, I mean, I don't think it's going to be on anyone's roadmap, right? Because like the cost to use OpenAI's API is so cheap. I mean, you're talking about like a third a cent. And so the way that they price their product, and they recently like dropped their pricing, it's not going to make sense for you to have your own AI company unless you have like a very, very unique data set. And even then, with that data set, you might still use their models. And so I think the way that they've priced their products is very smart. They're really going for a platform play.
Nathan, thanks so much, man, for joining us. I think that pretty much wraps us up.
Awesome.
Thanks, Nathan, and we'll talk soon.
Nathan, great to meet you, man. Thanks for hopping on.
Thank you.